Welcome to this episode of Abide in Me, How Jesus Models Secure Attachment with God. This series is a survey of the Gospel of Mark, looking for how Jesus models what is now called secure attachment, which is the physiological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual experience of what is often called salvation or regeneration or being conjoined with God or enlightenment, individuation, even becoming spiritual. Through the series, we will discover the benefits of becoming securely attached with God, which is the transformation of one's life into one of joy and satisfaction. We continue in Mark chapter 8. We're going to cover three stories: a healing, a moment of integration, and then a teaching about perspective. So Jesus has just recently modeled not engaging with argumentative people who simply want to prove me wrong. He then helps the apostles integrate the miracle of feeding thousands of people so that they see that they're supposed to be seeking spiritual food, which is understanding and using what one learns, and so feeling nurtured by goodness and living the truth. Now, Jesus, up till now, had healed a paralyzed man. He'd fixed a deformed hand. He'd cast out a demon. Twice he fed thousands. He healed a woman's chronic bleeding, and he brought that girl back to life. And then twice in it all, we were told he healed many people, whatever that means. And now we come to when he gives a man his sight. This is the first of only 2 times in Mark that we are told specifically about healing blindness. And so the story leads us along from Jesus refusing to play games with cynical people, right, to transformative experiences for the apostles, the fish and the bread of the healing, to an experiential lesson in the process of awakening to spiritual realities, which is going to be the healing of the blind man, finally to the capacity to see and acknowledge the source, the flow of love, which is going to be this conversation along the path. This is the pattern of our way to a secure attachment with God, with the divine, with the universe, and with ourselves and with other people. So the crowd comes to town, and Jesus takes a blind man who comes to him and takes the blind man out of his familiar space amongst his friends. And so I can imagine this blind man being led by this stranger might have felt some anxiety about depending upon Jesus, to be alone with Jesus. Is he safe? Is he going to be well guided? And right there, likewise, our transformation begins with this uncomfortable recognition that our notions that we've collected over the years, especially our religious knowledge that describe God and human life and good and evil, etc., that our body of beliefs might be inadequate to carry us through the journey of our spiritual development. You know, we might even be wrong. We might be blind. What's amazing about this process is that we really feel uncomfortable, even though we are being led by Jesus, right? We are allowing ourselves to be led into a divinely ordained process of spiritual development. The human spirit is designed to operate this way. It's an innate response, this worry, to an inner urge from the divine, which in fact is love itself. We're not typically conscious of this pressure, although it must always be there to get out of this blindness, to go trust the divine. Why else would we ever choose to question the worldview that has brought us to where we currently are? It has to be the ever-present draw of love flowing out of God. So he takes the blind man aside. The blind man is now paying attention to what is happening to him, and he experiences a gentle opening of his understanding to a new reality with that first touch of Jesus' hand. I am powerfully touched by the man's first sensation of the visible world. He calls it moving, shadowy figures like trees moving, which he nonetheless identifies as people. God does not wrench us into any new vision or way of being, even though such an advance could be instigated by a traumatic experience. God's love opens our eyes in a healing manner, allowing us to gradually come to know the truth. The man gets his full sight, and Jesus tells the man to go home, but not through the village. I guess his home would be somewhere on the outskirts, right? But now he can see how to get there on his own. He doesn't have to beg for guidance from other people. So I'd like to believe that the man had been dependent on others to find his way home, but from where he is now, even, the most direct and easiest path home is not through the village. He need not depend on others for his experience of this new visible world. Perhaps you've already had such an experience of discovering independence upon developing a new spiritual state of life. My earliest memory of this is the morning I woke up and tied my own shoelaces without any help. I remember hardly having to think about how to do it. It was an astonishing experience. I was living in a new, different world from then on, my own world, right? The miracle of spiritual development is acquiring the gift of understanding, or making sense, or making meaning of something we have learned, something we have seen. And it is a powerful gift. And it is an awesome responsibility. To be fully developed, to be able to establish a secure connection with other people and with our God, we have to own the meaning and the purpose that we give to our lives. That is so delightful a prospect. And it can be experienced as a heavy responsibility. Indeed, it is both at once. In the story, the healing of the blind man is a message to the apostles, whose worldview is still preventing them from seeing and understanding all of Jesus' teaching and all the point of his work. We are invited to consider our spiritual blindness and what it takes to be healed and given sight. And so we are to ask ourselves, take ourselves away from our normal life for a moment, as Jesus took the blind man, and ask ourselves, are we biased? Yeah, I think we are. Short-sighted? Yeah. Might I have a jaded perception? Yes. The resolution, the healing, is not to get rid of our point of view, for we cannot. It's simply the view of the world that is seen from our spot in it. But we can acquire, seemingly as a gift, a perception, an awareness of both the limitations of our view and the hurtful meanings we create, such as racism, and how to walk home on our own, to be freed up to see the world anew in a brighter light, right? And so we see how to travel on our way to connect with other people with this new gift of understanding and sight. That is, to be securely attached. The group then leaves Bethsaida, which is on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, and heads up about 10 miles. And along the way, as we're told, Jesus asks them, "Who do people say I am?" Now, is Jesus being codependent? Well, no, because he then asks them, "Well, who do you say that I am?" The story reports that Peter speaks up for the whole group. "You are the Christ," the Messiah in Hebrew. Well, first, we all have a Peter part, ready to speak up, to act first and then seek forgiveness if necessary, that bold part of us. If that is not part of you that is ever in charge of your life, that's okay. But it seems that all human beings have such a part. And what that part does for all of us is bringing to consciousness what has been previously unconsciously thought or felt or believed. And until it is spoken out loud, we don't realize that it's true for us. I would note the shadow side of this is when an unhelpful belief drives our actions and words and we don't see the connection. But the point is that I am sure that you have also had more than one experience of consciously realizing something that has merely been running in the background. It was the water you're swimming in, right? The air you're breathing. And it gives me, when I get that realization, it gives me a new confidence, a new freedom, a new understanding to have made it conscious. And this is part of becoming securely attached. To know what I think and like and want, to be able to name it, and to be able to say it to others, and to stand there, that this is who I am. Well, this is what I get from this little small incident of Jesus as they're walking along, modeling not dependence on what other people think, but encouraging us to confirm what we believe and love by sharing it out loud, in public, if necessary. Then we come to the third story. Jesus makes an amazing speech, and it is bad news. It's interesting in the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel does not quote Jesus, as other Gospels do at this point, but simply reports what Jesus said. Jesus predicts that he will be murdered. He also notes that he will rise from the dead. But as we know from the rest of the story, the people don't hear that part of the message, right? It takes them till the resurrection itself for them fully to get it. Well, I also resist bad news. I am, as it were, realistic, right? Events could happen in any number of ways. And the worst is only one of many on my list, right? And I purposefully resist focusing on the worst possible outcome to lead my list of possibilities, right? In my youth, maybe the same age as Peter, I would get vocal about this way of managing my fear. I would downplay any negative assessment in order to remove its weight. Now I can tell the story where that comes from. One manifestation of it was that I was always lighthearted, always making a joke. Now, in my elderhood, I aspire to no longer dismiss a person's negative view or make light of it. And that's because I have some ability, at least, to manage my fear. And so when someone presents a negative view, I align with them in their worry. I want to acknowledge its reality. I know that the terror will pass as I walk along with them. And then we can have a conversation about positive steps to take. Now, in this story from the Gospel of Mark, Peter is not there yet. He was immaturely eager for what he judged was the best outcome. But he is being managed by his fear. Being a young activist, an idealist, however, he reacts. He steps up and he speaks, probably for the whole group. Peter, believing he was the people's protector, right, takes Jesus aside to reprimand him for saying such things. Don't be so negative. And in the story, Jesus speaks harshly to Peter, accuses him of being Satan because Peter was being arrogant and superficial and egotistic. And then in the story, Jesus immediately turns and addresses the crowd, giving them this serious lecture about what it takes to live the life he is preaching. Well, before we consider Jesus' advice, I have to ask, how do I fit this angry outburst by Jesus into my hypothesis that Jesus is securely attached, that he does not need to shout to become angry or to be catastrophic in order to be seen or heard or valued? Or do I suppose that this was an example of Jesus being merely human, disconnected from his divine soul, which won't be the only time that's happened to him? He's portrayed as feeling afraid and alone. The prime example is when on the cross, he is said to cry out, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" Well, as I engage in my Taoist practice, I notice the yin and the yang here. I take a moment and I mentally back away. I do nothing. I seek balance. I create space for harmony. In the Gospel of Mark, we are told that Jesus is both finite and divine, the yin and the yang. Our practice of our faith can be less about figuring this out and more about being along the way with Jesus, being in awe of the mystery and the gloriousness of it all. And so at this moment, I cultivate an attitude of not doing, of allowing the universe and God, the divine, the source to flow in with presence and so with peace. I do not need to figure this out. Instead, I want to expand my ability to be in the presence of the divine, to be in the presence of the mystery of not knowing, even to be in the presence of the discomfort that not knowing brings to me. I want to cultivate a wider, deeper perspective about life. I am powerfully humbled and encouraged by the gospel story of the Son of Man, as Jesus here calls himself, going through the exact same ordeal. And so, to return to the lesson that I get from this story, the truth about our safe connection with God and the universe with life that Jesus models in this story is about managing our fear at the prospect of losing the long-held beliefs and desires that, it turns out, are negative, unhelpful, originating in our woundedness, in our ego, or that are merely materialistic, that hold us back from authentic spiritual life. I don't think I've ever experienced a life-threatening terror. This is what Jesus is describing in his little speech. So maybe I don't really get it when Jesus tells his followers that they will have to die to follow him. But what I do notice is that after this speech, somehow they continue to listen to him and to follow him. My takeaway is that there was an antidote to fear at work in them as they listened to what Jesus said. Because they had experienced being healed, even being brought back to life. They had experienced being loved and respected and encouraged by this amazing man. They had experienced the power that they could bring into the world when they were sent off to their trek to heal people and to teach. They had experienced being loved and respected. They felt a secure attachment with Jesus. Now, perhaps it was not their first reaction, as Peter demonstrated, but they remember that they trust him. They feel safe to stay and listen. Their capacity to tolerate their discomfort was increasing. And then they were able to hear his message of life, and it was made powerful by the contrast to their initial fear. Jesus was promising real life, soul life, what we now know as spiritual life. And they were able to manage their fear and believe him. So Jesus is showing us how we can actually manage that worst existential fear of natural death or of spiritual death. We can manage the loss of something we love by being securely attached, by having a trusting relationship with our God, with other people, with ourselves, cultivating this wider, deeper perspective, staying open and receptive to the blessings of life. And we learn to tolerate this discomfort little by little along the way. Every time we put aside the voice of ego, or our materialism, or our wounded self, or our need to get back at someone or to tell them the truth, and instead listen for the Lord's loving voice through our true self, through our soul. I'm convinced it's always there. It is our task to quiet the mind and listen. Our task is to practice letting go of our worldview and look for the divine, for the universe's design. The challenge is to stop avoiding the experience of the fear of loss by accepting the message that our life is spiritual, eternal, loving. The glory of this new spiritual, loving life will survive the death of any of my self-centered, myopic, merely natural worldviews that proposes alternate endings that feel happier to my natural self, that propose an easier way through life, but are actually spiritual death. Rather, the promise is that love will always be present and connecting us to life, to our God, to ourself, to others. Every time we stop our thoughts and open our minds and listen to this message in our hearts, where God lives. I pray this has supported your transformative life, whatever practice you have in your life. I want to thank Solomon Keel for his music, and I want to invite you to make a contribution to this work if you wish and are able through the PayPal link. And I invite you to continue to listen to the next episode. You be well.